I used to take down enemies with nothing but a piece of rope. Now I'm getting fined by the HOA over a potted plant. Funny how life works, isn't it? They see me, the quiet guy trimming the hedges, minding my own business. What they don't see is the chaos that unfolds when you push a man too far, especially when you threaten the one person he would die for. This isn't just a petty HOA dispute, it's a reckoning. It all started with a knock at the door. Stick around, you're about to hear a tale of how my peaceful retirement turned into a battlefield. My name's David Peterson, and if you think retirement means peace, you've clearly never lived under a power-hungry HOA president. This is the story of how my quiet suburban life spiraled into madness. David and his wife Elena thought they had found paradise when they moved to Willowbrook subdivision 3 years ago. Beautiful homes, clean streets, and friendly neighbors. Elena, an architect, transformed their backyard into a serene masterpiece. But David's military precision with landscaping was what made their home stand out. It wasn't just about beauty. It was about discipline and attention to detail, traits honed over 20 years of military service. But when Richard Harrison became the new HOA president, everything changed. Richard wasn't your typical HOA president. The old one had been a retired teacher, just ensuring lawns were mowed and boats weren't parked in driveways. But Richard, a former military man in his mid-50s, and he wore his authority like a badge. He constantly reminded everyone he was in charge now. His first move was to implement new regulations that felt more like harassment than neighborhood improvements. Suddenly, grass couldn't be higher than 2.5 inches, door colors needed approval, and flower pot placement, you guessed it, subject to his approval. The harassment started small, but it didn't stay that way. The first fine came for grass being too tall. It was a $200 fine for grass that was maybe 3 inches at its highest point. Then, 2 weeks later, the front door, a deep blue color they'd had for years, was too vibrant. Another fine for $350. Elena kept detailed notes, spotting suspicious behavior from Richard's assistant, Carol, who had begun taking pictures of their house. But things only escalated from there. Elena noticed a camera mounted on a utility pole facing their house. When she called the utility company, they denied any knowledge. David, sensing something was off, started installing his own security system, high-definition cameras with night vision. But it wasn't just about security. It was about sending a message. No one crosses the line. Things began to take a darker turn. The fines grew larger. $750 for what was deemed excessive garden decoration. But it wasn't just the fines anymore. Richard had become obsessed with David. Richard's behavior felt off. There was something in his stare, something that David couldn't shake. Richard even asked David if he'd ever served overseas, a question that only heightened his suspicions. The next few weeks were filled with covert surveillance, secret meetings between Richard and shady figures, and more bizarre violations. The tipping point came when Richard hired 2 enforcers, Max and Jake, who seemed more like thugs than HOA officers. It wasn't long before things took a personal turn. Dead plants appeared on their doorstep, Elena's car was keyed, and their yard was vandalized. This wasn't just petty harassment. It was intimidation, pure and simple. David's military training kicked in. Instead of reacting rashly, he waited for the perfect moment to make his move. And when the enforcers showed up at his door, it was game on. Max and Jake, in their cheap uniforms, showed up at the house for an emergency inspection. Elena, being law-abiding, let them in. That was her first mistake. By the time David arrived home, the damage was done. Elena's precious pottery collection was destroyed, family photos were torn apart, and the garden, the one thing they had built together, was torn to pieces. It was then that the physical assault began. Max and Jake grabbed Elena, shoving her into the kitchen counter. When David walked in, everything changed. It wasn't the quiet retiree who entered that room. It was a man who had lived a lifetime of danger. David took down Max and Jake with ease, using his old military training to subdue them quickly and without permanent harm. The power-hungry HOA enforcers had made a grave mistake. They thought a quiet suburban gardener was easy prey. They were wrong. David didn't just stop at disarming the thugs. He secured them, held them until the authorities arrived, and focused on what mattered most: his family's safety. When Alina asked how he did it, David's calm voice answered, "They attacked my family, and now they'll learn what happens when you mess with someone who's been trained to fight back." But there was more to Richard Harrison's obsession with David than simple harassment. Elena's investigation into Richard's past uncovered a dark secret. He had been dishonorably discharged from the military, with records that hinted at a mission gone horribly wrong, and it was all connected to David. Richard knew who David really was, and he was using his position of power to torment him. But David wasn't the kind of man to back down. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, David knew it was time to face Richard once and for all. The quiet retiree was about to become something else, a man on a mission, and Richard Harrison would learn, in the most dramatic way possible, that some battles should never be started. Do you have any crazy HOA stories of your own? Leave a comment and share your wildest experiences. This battle isn't over yet. Stay tuned for the next chapter of David's journey.